We have a large participation, huh? Very good.
Yeah, we'll just give a couple more minutes for people to arrive, and then we'll start. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rajendra here. Will the recording will be available later for us?
Yes, there will.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. Good evening to those of you in the Southern Hemisphere. It is fantastic to have such a great turnout, and thank you all for giving up some of your time to hear from us. The latest on where we've got to with our dry turf project. If I could ask you all to mute your microphones, just so that we don't have any background noise during the presentation. The format of today, we intend to have maybe 30 minutes of presenting the updates, and then certainly enough time for questions. From the FIH, and I'm delighted to welcome you all on behalf of the FIH, and I'd like to hand over to our president, Mr. Tayyab Ikram, to open this meeting and to say a few words. Thank you. Tayyab, if you can hear me, over to you. You seem to have lost Tayyab, Andre.
Yeah, seeing he most probably has some.
No, I'm. Give me. It's my fault. I will. Yeah, it's you. Tayyab, you're on. Apologies, it was my mistake.
So that was a good start, Andre, that you stop your president immediately. Very good. So, muito obrigado. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm full of gratitude for your great work. Whatever capacity we are facilitating, you are facilitating, and our national associations, all people involved in this industry. I think the main goal is to provide the best ever facilities for our athletes. So that is the basic objective of all of us in this role, and that is something we need to improve day by day. That how best we can improve our facilities, and by doing that we can help our athletes to perform better and better. I think this dry turf, this is something, it is a need of the day. Today we have, I am very certain about that we need to help environment. We need to provoke and promote more sustainability aspects in coming days, and we have to give back what we enjoyed so far back to this planet, and this is one of the effort under that concept. I know that some of our sports people are here, some of our master coaches are here. I can see Rodolfo Mendoza. I know their questions already in anticipation in their questions that during the whole process, the athletes are first, and we have already in a testing process also. There will be no compromise on playability, athletes' welfare, and people from our partners like Paul is working that how best we can provide a surface that can assist the athletes for their best skill execution. And I think those are few things are given and few things we need to work on. And there are one bridge of innovation that we can mitigate where are the differences. And that is the process our colleagues and professionals will explain you on this process where we are today and where we are heading to. So that is regarding this special topic. Since I see around 40 to 45 national associations on board, that this is a combined message from me and from a Thierry that we are on a regular engagement process with the national associations, no matter what topic is and what agenda it is. And we had very successfully engaged last 40 nations 2 weeks before on the new innovation around the competitions, how new opportunities we can create together with your help. And this engagement process is continuing. I have only one thing which need to share, that in 2 weeks' time we are going to launch the FIH empowerment and engagement strategy in the Olympic House of Lausanne, and that will be first of its kind. Our and we that's a whole thing is to facilitate all our national associations, our athletes, our coaches, our officials, okay, and our professional staff, that how best we can perform with one objective, to provide the best possible facilities for our athletes. And you will receive this unveiling the more details, and then we will be in touch with you, and what part and what area you need assistance in your development journey. We will be there. So that just bit of this I just add here, taking the opportunity that we have representatives from national associations. But this will not stop here. We will continue our engagement process in future on different topics and some issues of the present time, and also some of our sustainable solution for future. Before further interaction, I just pass back to John, and thank you for listening these words. And we stay in touch. My doors are open. I am available anytime. Any listener to this a call today, no matter what role you are playing in the industry or national association, we are at the FIH open for suggestions, and we are together with you on this journey. Back to John. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tayyab. And I know you're very busy and have other meetings today, so really appreciate you joining us. I'd now like to pass the floor to our CEO, Thierry Weil. Thierry.
Thank you, John. Thank you, President. Just briefly from my side, just remembering you, during the Congress 2018, I mentioned officially that we have to go for dry turf, which I was looked a little bit like somebody coming from another world. And then we had a supplier meeting in Lausanne, which I mentioned that again. And the reply was, that's the third CEO talking about dry turf, but are they really serious about it? And you see that we are really serious. And even more so with the coming of our new president, he gave it a new push and a stronger push actually to accelerate and to do. COVID slowed down a little bit because, you know, the plan was that literally Paris should be played on a dry turf, but COVID did not allow us to test, as the president mentioned, with our athletes, which is the key element in that, putting that forward, and acceptance of the athletes is key. And I mean, we all agree that water shortage around the world is more and more, and sustainability is a key factor. And I think we will deliver a great thing in sustainability the day we can implement actually the dry turf, and also save a lot of savings for our national associations, not having to put on water. So thank you all for being here. It shows the interest of all of you. I'm really happy that you all on that call. And please, we will do a little presentation, and then don't be shy to ask question either directly or, as our president said, afterwards to us, to the team, to him directly, to me directly. We are there for you. So thank you and have a good session.
Thank you very much, Thierry. So I'm now going to pass to our facilities manager, our expert, and the man that many of you already know, Alistair Cox, to take us through an update on what we've done so far. As Thierry said, from the point of making that announcement, all of the work that we've done with our research partners, with some of our suppliers, to get us to where we are today. There'll then be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So if we can ask that you hold your questions until after Alistair has been through the presentation. This session is being recorded, and we will circulate this recording afterwards. So no need to take detailed notes, and you can review that in your own time and share that with your colleagues. So thank you very much. Thank you to Tyab, thank you to Thierry, and I now pass to Alistair to take us through the updates. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for joining. I'm going to share my screen and just go through a brief presentation showing what we've been doing since the announcement was made in 2018. Hopefully my screen is now visible, if somebody could confirm. Perfect, thank you. Okay. So, as everybody knows, and as Tyab and Thierry have already alluded to, hockey's been playing on synthetic turf surfaces for 50 plus years. And for the majority of that time, it's definitely had a preference for playing on a wet surface. The playing characteristics were found to be superior. It allowed the players to excel, to develop their skills, to execute those skills to their full potential. But again, picking up on what Thierry's already said and what was announced at the Congress in 2018, we recognise that using wet fields creates a number of financial and environmental challenges for many people wishing to provide hockey surfaces. I think there's a general acceptance now that water is becoming an ever scarcer commodity around the world. Many parts of the world are struggling, and the predictions are in the next 30 years, much of the world will be designated as having water scarcity, which is effectively where there is not enough water for human consumption, let alone the luxuries of playing sport. We also know that irrigation systems are a significant financial burden to people building hockey fields. Typically today, it's at least $100,000 on the cost of a field, which is prohibitive to many. The cost of the water is an issue. Certainly in the current environment, the cost of the power to pump the water is also becoming a big issue for many clubs. The big increases in electricity seen as a result of the issues in Ukraine have certainly focused attention on these features. And increasingly, as we recognise the carbon footprint that we all create has to be reduced, pumping the water, treating the water creates CO2, which many will start to see as an unnecessary use of water and its implications. So we need to move away from playing on wet fields. And as Thierry mentioned, that was announced by the executive board and himself in 2018, and we've been working on this strategy ever since. So what have we been doing? Well, we challenge the industry to develop the surfaces that we want, i.e. surfaces that perform like a wet surface but without the use of water. But they turned around to us and said, what does that mean? You, hockey, define what you require from the playing surfaces and the standards that form part of the quality program. And hockey has been doing that since the 1990s. So there's a well-established model of the sport telling the industry what it requires from the hockey surfaces it wishes to use, and then the industry developing the surfaces to meet our requirements. Up until now, our standards have said for the elite level of the game, the surfaces need to be watered. That meant that we did not need to worry about certain properties because we knew when the surface was wet, they were perfectly okay. If we remove the requirement to water, we need to verify the surfaces are still okay. So we needed to find a way of identifying those key properties, measuring them, and setting guideline parameters that the industry can then try to achieve, and then get the players to feedback on whether the industry and ourselves have been successful in defining those criteria. So we set out a pathway, 7 steps effectively from the initial concept through to introducing the surfaces for top level competition. Again, as Thierry mentioned, we initially hoped to do this by the Paris Olympics next year, but COVID basically set us back a couple of years. But the steps, as you can see on the slide, are to determine what it is players like about wet fields, what they dislike about the current dry surfaces, to then quantify what those properties are, to find a way to measure them so we can get objective data to set guideline performance criteria for the manufacturers to try and achieve. We can then get player feedback, we can tweak our standards, and eventually we can then amend them to introduce the new category for use at the top levels of the sport. I'm going to run through each of those stages in a little more detail. We've used external experts to help us. We've had a lot of support, particularly from Loughborough University in the UK, who've undertaken a lot of the player surveys in the initial phases of the project, and we'll be continuing that as fields are built and players start to use them for the first time. What has happened to my slides? Sorry about that. So in 2020, 2021, Loughborough initially set some focus groups. They have a lot of elite players at the university, international players from the United Kingdom and elsewhere. They created a focus group to identify the properties that they thought were important. They bounced those around, they got agreement, and then they created an online questionnaire. And we shared that with all of the teams competing at the Tokyo Olympics. One small blessing possibly of the lockdown situation in Tokyo was the players had plenty of spare time, and we were anticipating we might get 20, 30, 40 responses. We actually, as you can see on the slide, we got 232 responses from the top players from around the world. Again, you can see the nations that responded. We had a really good gender mix. It was almost 50-50 male, female, and we had a good representation from all positions of play on the field. So about 10% of the responses were from the goalkeepers, which fit in nicely, etc., etc. So we got a really good response from the players. And Loughborough analysed all that data. And as you can see there, these were the key points that came out. There's a lot more background information. But a very good thing from our perspective was there was a very good consistency in what the players were saying. It didn't matter if it was a female player from Australia or a male player from India or a player from Argentina or from Europe. They all had similar views on what they liked and disliked about wet surfaces and what their concerns were about playing on the current surfaces when they are dry. And having identified these properties, we were then able, working with one of the test institutes that we work with, to develop new means of measuring these properties. So a key thing we identified was the way that the ball interacts with the surface. And that relates to the consistency of the ball, roll, the speed of the ball, the way it bounces, etc. So they have developed new tests based on mimicking what we actually saw happening in the field of play. So we took a lot of high-speed video analysis of players hitting the ball, receiving the ball, etc. And then they could develop tests to simulate that in the laboratory so we could measure exactly the same properties. So we looked at the speed of the ball, we looked at the way the ball bounces on the surface, and then we can analyze that in more detail using high-speed video analysis and very sophisticated computer software. We looked at the way the stick interacts with the surface, the way it glides across the surface, the way it's controlled, the smoothness of the surface, and the ability to initiate some of the 3D skills that players attribute to playing on wet surfaces. So again, we looked at things in slow motion, at players performing the actions, and then developed tests to replicate them in the laboratory. So we are simulating in the laboratory what the players are doing, so we can then measure these properties to define the ranges of acceptability that we're looking for. And then finally, we looked at the 3D skills, which again was an aspect that the players had identified as being key to the way the surfaces perform. In addition to these new properties that we previously had not measured, we reviewed all of the current performance criteria. So the way that the player's shoe interacts with the surface, the firmness of the surface, the cushioning of the surface. We know the water does contribute to these properties. So we wanted to ensure that the new surfaces without water had similar levels of grip, of comfort, etc., to replicate what the players are currently playing on as far as possible. So that we've replicated these new standards and verified that it's achievable using this new technology. That piece of work has taken the best part of probably about 18 months to undertake and to conclude. And the end result is that we have now prepared a new category of hockey turf in our standards for hockey surfaces. We've called it an innovation category. We know what we want to measure. We believe we know how to measure it. We think we know what is an acceptable range of performance, but we now need people to build fields for players to go out and test these fields, to play on them, and we need the feedback from players to validate whether we've got the parameters and the properties correct, or do we need to tweak things to ensure that the surfaces are as good as we can get them and as close as possible to the current wet surfaces. So the new innovation standard will look at the way the ball interacts with the surface, the way the stick interacts with the surface, the way that the player interacts with the surface. But equally, if we want people to invest in these new surfaces, we need to make sure the durability and the environmental compatibility of these surfaces is as good as the current surfaces we are using. We cannot expect people to invest in a new field that traditionally they would expect to last 10, 12 years, possibly, to find that these new surfaces are only going to last 5 or 6 years. So we've retained the durability criteria we had previously. We've retained the environmental compatibility criteria we already have. In Europe and many other parts of the world, synthetic turf surfaces are coming under the spotlight. The fact they are made out of plastics is becoming a concern to some environmental lobbyists and some regulators, and we need to ensure that the surfaces we are using for hockey are as environmentally friendly as possible, that we are not creating sources of pollution or concern or contamination. So the standards include all the criteria we already have. Within the innovation category, we've defined 2 ranges. The optimum performance is based on what we have measured using wet surfaces. So we know how the current elite wet turfs perform. And ideally, the new surfaces will have identical performance to the current surfaces. But at this stage, we don't honestly know if that's fully achievable. Therefore, we have set a slightly broader range of properties to give people a target, and we will get the feedback from the players to determine whether that innovation range is acceptable, or do we need to squeeze it and fine tune it to get it closer to the wet surfaces. Equally, there's no point in us setting criteria if the industry failed to deliver. We can have a standard, but if nobody can achieve it, actually we're not doing any good. We're not helping the game advance. So ideally, it's a target. And as I say, there's an optimum performance range, which is where we hope everybody will end up. But if they end up in the innovation range, we will have to review the implications of that. So moving forward, that new standard has now been published. It is available. It is on our website. It has been shared with all our industry partners within the quality program, and I'll share the link with you in a second. But that is now available, and we are aware that there are a number of companies who are developing these new surfaces, and they are in the process of having their products tested so that they can compare the performance of their surfaces against the criteria that we've defined. We will have access to those reports, and if the products meet the requirements of the innovation standard, we will give them FIH endorsement to say that they meet the innovation criteria, to give the market confidence they are buying surfaces that are performing as well as we can expect at this time. So ideally, the next stage in this project that they meet the innovation criteria to give the market confidence they are buying surfaces that are performing as well as we can expect at this time. So ideally, the next stage in this project is for fields to be built. And we are aware that, again, there are already market demands and people are asking for these surfaces, having heard about what we're doing. And we are aware that fields have been installed in Europe, that there are fields being built in the Netherlands at the moment. There are fields in Germany using this new turf technology. As the fields are being built, we then need to get elite players to use them, to perform on them, so that we can collect the feedback. And we are working again with Loughborough University in the UK to develop a tool that will now enable us to collect player feedback. It doesn't matter if it's in the UK, if it's in the Netherlands, if it's in Germany, if it's in Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, India, anywhere in the world that has these surfaces, we will be able to collect the feedback from the players to get a better understanding about how good these surfaces actually are. And that will enable us to tweak our requirements, and we will feed back to the manufacturers if we feel improvements are required. We do have some specific areas of interest, which we are aware that will be areas of concern to the players, to the coaches, to the users of the fields. Potentially, and people with long memories will recall playing on surfaces in the 80s and 90s, maybe early 2000s, where carpet burns was a not insignificant issue. We hope that carpet burns will not be an issue, but they may be a consideration. Players can wear the protective clothing if they wish, but again, we need to monitor that to see how significant a problem that may or may not be. We need to make sure that the foot grip is acceptable. We want these surfaces to perform adequately when they're dry, but equally, we do not want to end up like the sports of tennis or cricket, where people stop playing as soon as it starts to rain. If we were to do that in some of the major hockey playing nations, not much hockey would be played. So we need these surfaces to have acceptable performance and grip when they are dry, but equally when they are wet. So we will be looking at that specifically. Likewise, we need to ensure that when these surfaces are used in hot climates, they're not too grippy. We haven't got the water there as a lubricant. We need to ensure that high foot grip does not create an issue and create the potential for injuries. Likewise, without the cooling benefit of water, we need to ensure that the surfaces do not become too hot that creates an issue for players playing in those parts of the world where the ambient temperature is hot or warm. So we'll be looking at that and making sure that we don't have any issues with fatigue, and equally making sure that we don't have issues with the balls becoming discolored, etc., from color transfer from the carpets, which was something we have seen in the past. So these are issues that have been flagged up as areas of concern. I'm getting 3-4 a dozen inquiries a week about dry turfs. There's clearly a lot of interest and there's an appetite for these surfaces around the world. One of the questions I'm frequently being asked is about the construction of the bases for the fields, the drainage systems. And at this time, we do not envisage those changing at all from the way that fields are being built today. So the construction of the bases will remain similar. If they're built in accordance with our standards, of our recommendations, we see no reason why the new surfaces cannot be laid directly either onto existing fields or onto new fields built to the same standards. So we're not going to change the methods of construction. So hopefully that will not result in cost increases. And as I said at the beginning, if we've eliminated the need for an irrigation system, we've reduced the cost of the field by a significant amount of money. In terms of field certification, in many countries, fields are certified for competition reasons, or people want to have the field certified to validate that they've got a good quality field, that the installation has been done correctly to the required standards. What we are saying initially and what we are suggesting is that these new innovation turfs probably shouldn't be laid on major international arenas. They shouldn't be laid on the field used by the first team of a top hockey club. They should probably be laid on the second or third field for those clubs who have the luxury of having a number of different fields. Because we need to make sure we've got it right before they go into too many high-profile installations. So at the moment, we are looking at the innovation category turfs to be laid on fields that would traditionally probably have had a sand-dressed or national category surface. And initially, we will primarily certify fields where that is required as a category 3 field, which is a field that is predominantly intended for national and community competitions. We may, at our discretion, certify category 2 or category 1 fields, which are the international venues, but we wouldn't be doing that as a matter of routine until we have confidence that the requirements and the standards are correct. That is today, but we want to get to a position by Q3 of next year, i.e. following the Paris Olympics, that we have enough confidence in the standards, we have enough player feedback to tweak the standards if need be, that we can amend the requirements for the global category fields to incorporate the dry turfs, so that by autumn 24, you will be able to install these fields on any hockey facility and have the confidence that it will meet the requirements that we consider appropriate for top-level international hockey competitions. And then finally, I mentioned we published a lot of the new standard. We've actually created a new page on our website. It's using the old website address because the quality program is still transferring over to the new address. But at the moment, if you go to fih.ch/dry turf, you can download the innovation standard for those of you interested in what it says. There is a project report update. So that summarizes effectively where we are today. So it documents what I've just presented. And you can also download the report that gives all the background into the research that we commissioned that's been undertaken that has fed into the innovation standard. And as products are tested and certified as meeting the innovation category, we will list them specifically on that page so people will be able to go and look directly to see which companies and which products meet the innovation standard requirements. That's everything from me for now. John, I will hand over to you to take over. I will keep manning the slides.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and yeah, big thanks for all the work that you've done in this. You've summarised in 20 minutes a huge amount of work that's been done, and thank you to Loughborough University, to Labo Sport, and to all of our partners who've been involved, and obviously to the athletes who have been involved in providing us with feedback. It's a big project. It's a big potential change to our turfs, but it's an environmental imperative. So very pleasingly, in the last few years or so, we've very much moved from a discussion about whether this is the right thing to do to this is definitely the right thing to do, but how are we going to do it and create these new turfs to be as close as possible to the current wet turfs that we use at top level today. So a big thank you from me, Alistair, for all of the work that you've done. If we could move on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk briefly about the transition, because clearly there is a period where currently we are playing our top international competitions on wet turf, and in the future we will be playing all of our competitions on dry turf. But there is going to be a transition period and a period where we're moving from one to the other. So we just wanted to talk you through what that looks like over the next 5 years, just to give you concrete information about what we're doing at the very top level of our competitions. But clearly throughout this period, this transition period, there will be both wet and new dry turfs being used for competitions all around the world. So if we start on the left-hand side of this diagram here, and we look at last year and 2022, so in the top half of this slide, you have competitions that either have taken place or will take place on dry turf. And then in the darker blue lower half, you have those that have taken place on wet turf. So you can see that in June of last year, we held our first competition. It was a Hockey Fives competition here in Lausanne on a dry turf. It was the first iteration, the first innovative product, and it was incredibly useful both to see how it performed, but also to get athlete feedback on the things that needed to be improved. The test went particularly well because on the first day it was very dry and hot, and on the second day it rained. And one of the key challenges for these new turfs is they need to perform, as Alistair has said, both on a dry day but also on a wet day. We can't end up in a situation where we can only play when it's either wet or dry. So in the past, we've ensured that the turf is always wet by watering it. We're now going to be subject to nature and then the environment. And if it rains, we need the pitch to be able to play really well as a wet turf. But obviously, if it's a dry day, then it needs to perform and the athletes need to be able to play on it when it's dry. So we had a test, which by chance, we had a day of dry and a day of wet. So that was really helpful, and it was really good to get the feedback of the athletes. Also, last year, we obviously had the Women's World Cup held in the Netherlands and in Spain, played fully on a wet turf. And that was then replicated when we played the Men's World Cup in January of this year over in India, again on wet turf. And all of the Pro League matches that have taken place in the current season, the 2022-23 season, obviously all taking place on wet turf as well. And as we start to move to the right, you can see that the Pro League matches for next season, 23-24, will continue to be played on wet turf. The primary and obvious reason for that is that the Paris Olympics, which will be the last Olympic Games that we will play on a watered turf, therefore all of the teams who are preparing and training for that need to be playing their top competition on a watered turf, on a wet turf. The same goes for our Olympic qualifiers that will take place in January. They will be played on wet turf as close as possible to the conditions of the Paris turf that will then be used in July next year. But above the line here, we can see that in the middle of this year, so in October of this year, we've just confirmed that we will be holding a Hockey Fives event in Egypt. That will be played on a dry turf, and obviously, given the environmental conditions in Egypt, that will be a good test of the turf on both being dry but also being warm. And then when we move then to the Hockey Fives World Cup in Oman in January of next year, again, that will be played on a dry turf. And you can clearly see that we're using Hockey 5s with its smaller court size, both from a testing environment, but also obviously from a cost basis. Then testing in Hockey 5s makes a lot of sense. We're very aware, and we've had athlete feedback that we need to ensure that we do then test on full size fields, because obviously there are differences when you get that additional size and space of field in the 11-a-side game. You get players maybe moving at higher speeds, changing direction, throwing longer passes, hitting longer passes, etc. So we're testing in the Hockey 5's environment, but we absolutely will be moving that to the Hockey 11's full-size turf. And as Alistair has said, there are already dry turfs, full-size dry turfs being laid. There are a couple being laid in the Netherlands, and we're expecting more to be laid over the course of the next 6 months. So then we move through next year, through 2024, and as I said, the Paris Games being the last to be played on an irrigated turf, on a watered turf. And clearly, therefore, because the next World Cup in 2026 in Belgium and the Netherlands will be played on a dry turf, then those teams and athletes preparing for the World Cup in 2026 will want to be preparing on dry turfs, so turfs that are as similar as possible to that they'll be playing the World Cup on in 2026. And therefore, we will be making available, and manufacturers and our partners, Polytam, will be making available the turf that will be used in 2026 at the back end of 2024. So after the Paris Games, those who wish to, those national associations who wish to invest in a dry turf that's then going to be the same as in 2026 can do so straight after the Paris Games, and therefore we can start to our athletes can start to play on it. We get even better elite athlete feedback, and then some of our competitions through 2024 and early 2025 will move on to that dry turf. As I said, there will be a period when we're playing top level international competitions on both wet and dry, but certainly by the 25-26 season, we want all of our Pro League matches to be played on dry turf. Our World Cup qualifiers in January of 2026 will be played on dry turf. And then, as I previously mentioned, the 2026 World Cup in Belgium and the Netherlands will be played on dry turf. And to be honest, we're then sort of through the transition at the very top level. All matches at the very top level will be played on that dry turf from then onwards. But there certainly will be other matches, other continental level of matches, international matches, obviously club level matches that will continue to be played on existing wet fields. And that will continue for the lifespan of those existing wet fields. We're certainly, and it would be wrong for us to suggest that anyone who currently has a wet field should be taking that up and replacing it with a new dry turf. That replacement needs to happen at the end of the lifetime of the current turf that has been installed. So if you've had a turf down with a 10-year lifespan and it's been down for 5 years, then we would expect that to continue to be used for the next 5 years. But when it gets to the point of replacement of that turf, it doesn't need to be replaced with another wet turf. The irrigation system no longer needs to be used, and it can be moved to a dry turf surface. And then just if we look right to the end of this horizon, and we look towards the Los Angeles 2028 Olympic Games and the Olympic qualifiers that happen in the January of 2028 before that, then clearly that will be on dry turf as well. There are many other events that we haven't included, but we just wanted to give an idea at that very top level. There'll be the Youth Olympic Games in Senegal in 2026. There'll be Nations Cups. There'll be Continental Championships that will transition and move to dry turf as well over that next 3, 4, 5 years. But Los Angeles Olympics will certainly be played on a dry turf. Final point on this, I mentioned it, and both Thierry, Tayab, and also Alistair have mentioned it, that the feedback of athletes is absolutely primary here. The natural reaction, and having spoken to many athletes and being an ex-athlete myself, the natural reaction when you start talking about dry turf is to think of the current turfs that we're all used to when they're wet and what happens to them when they dry out. And that is absolutely not what the new dry turfs are going to be like. So we need to all have a mindset shift to know that these are going to be new turfs with new properties, and they're not going to be watered. but they're not going to have the same issues that that turfs that are designed to be watered, but they're then left to dry, which is what we imagine in our minds when we think about a dry turf. These are different to that, and that's definitely a mind shift that we need to make. But we'll be talking to athletes, we'll be explaining the processes we've been through, we'll be demonstrating what the laboratories say, but absolutely we'd be wanting to get their feedback on how these new surfaces play, what they are able to do, what they're not able to do, any concerns that they've got, and we'll continue to try and improve those turfs, just like all artificial turfs have been improved over the last 40, 50 years, and the turfs that we played on 20 years ago are very different to the turfs that the athletes are playing on now, and they will adjust, and there may be some new skills come into the game based on these new surfaces, but we will be looking to replicate as close as we possibly can the wet surfaces that we currently use. Thank you, Alistair. And I think just one more slide from me. The final slide is just to acknowledge that this is not simply about the turf. There will be other areas of innovation, and again, just like has happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years, when new turfs have come out, then there have been other changes to the equipment that we use to improve the playing performance of those athletes. So in some cases that might be around footwear. It might be around sticks. Certain shoes and grip patterns work better on a water-based field than they do on a sand dress field. So athletes are already used to having maybe different equipment depending on what they're going to be playing a match on. And we've had an amazing innovation here by a company or a university and a company based in Belgium who have developed a ball that actually holds water. And as it moves across a dry field, it releases a tiny amount of that water, and you can see that on this video here. And that water then interacts and provides a layer between the ball and the surface. And it turns out that the ball reacts exactly as it does on a water-based pitch, even though the pitch is completely dry and there's this tiny amount of water that is being released by the ball. Now, that comes with its challenges, of course, and there are areas that we need to continue to develop and work on with those ball manufacturers, and how much water is needed to be released, what is the impact on the mass of the ball, and we obviously need to have a consistency so that ball is not changing weight significantly during a match. So many ideas have been put forward, but this one is one that was unexpected, but has been proved to be really successful, and it'll be part of ongoing trials and ongoing athlete feedback that we get in our upcoming events over the coming years. Alistair, I think that's the final slide.
Correct, John. Yep, I will stop sharing and we can take some questions.
Thank you very much. So yeah, lots of content there, as I mentioned. It's been recorded, so we'll circulate this. And if having gone online to the section of the website that Alistair has mentioned and read through many of those technical documents, there are further questions, then obviously please email them through after this webinar. But for now, if we can ask you to put your questions in the chat, and then we will go through those questions one by one. Andre will open up your microphone and turn on your camera so that you can ask your question. I think the first comment or question that we have here is from Hazel Kennedy. Andre, if you're able to unmute Hazel, and then we can hear her question.
I just made Hazel a presenter so she can open her microphone and camera.
Thank you.
Hazel, you're muted. Hazel, you need to unmute yourself and you need to open your camera.
Okay, I think if we're having some technical difficulties, I can simply read the question that Hazel has put into the chat, and we can go forwards like that if there are challenges with technology. So Hazel's point was, what is the durability time? So I think Alistair, this was when you were talking about the inclusion of the durability tests within the new innovation standard. So if you could just take that question, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Durability ultimately is primarily dependent on use. To a degree, it's dependent on where you are in the world. UV degradation from the sunlight will affect the quality of the carpets, the degradation of the carpets. But we would typically at the moment say a hockey field should last 8 to 10 to 12 years, depending on use and maintenance. Ideally, these surfaces will perform for a similar period of time. We might find that the wear is slightly more accelerated because we haven't got the lubricating effect of the water on the surface. So it may mean we lose a couple of years, but I think time will tell. I think it's also reasonable to say if we look at what's happened with the hockey surfaces over the last 10, 15 years, the surfaces that we were installing in the early 2000s were not nearly as durable as the surfaces we're currently using. So if we take a small step backwards today, I would imagine the industry will recoup that relatively quickly, so that we can go back to expecting typically a 10-year life expectancy.
Thanks, Alistair. Next question from Vikram Singh from Hockey India.
I'm going to make Vikram an attendee. Just give me a few seconds. Vikram, you are now a presenter. You can turn on your microphone and your camera.
Hi, John. Hi, Alistair. Hi, Andre. Question coming with respect to the industry specific in India, if I say, the finances involved, because as Alistair, you mentioned, the 3 layers which goes underneath the main playing surface are going to be the same. There are no changes to that. So I presume the financial implication stays the same, except for few $100,000, which were being put into for irrigation system. Only that cost goes away. Rest everything stays the same. Because this is going to be the only valid question which will come across to us from various of our stakeholders when this news goes out with respect to usage of this stuff in the 3rd quarter of next year.
Hi, Vikram. Yes. Between 60 and 70% of the cost of a field today is actually in the infrastructure, the foundations, the drainage, the base on which the shock pad, the cushioning layer, and the turf is laid. That is not going to change. As I said in the presentation, we think the specifications for those will be identical. So the cost of the field is not going to reduce significantly other than that saving on the irrigation system. So if people are expecting fields to be 20, 30, 40% cheaper than they currently are, unfortunately, that's not going to be the reality. They're going to be of a similar order, as I say, other than you've saved 100,000, give or take, dollars on the irrigation system.
All right. Thanks. Thanks,
Vikram.
Much.
Thanks, Vikram. Good to see you. And I think just the other points to add, obviously there is an ongoing maintenance saving because we won't be needing to water or to power the watering systems. And then on the positive, there's not a requirement to change the base when replacing a wet turf for a dry turf. So if you're in an existing stadium or venue or facility, then it'll be a case of at the end of life rolling up that used turf and then putting down a dry turf. So should be relatively easy.
And only just to extend this, the material of the polymer used, is it again the byproduct of sugarcane, an enhanced version of what we are exactly using now?
It will depend on the supplier, but I think you're referring to the pitches used in the World Cup, which were polytan pitches, and absolutely the surfaces that they're producing for dry turf have that same green technology within them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great. We have another question from Hazel. So I'll read that one in case Hazel is still having technical problems. So Hazel says, can we assume that the current dry turfs being laid meet the conditions and criteria as outlined here?
That is a really good question. As of today, we can't make that assumption because we don't know. We, the FIH, because we have not seen the internal R&D testing that the manufacturers have undertaken. We have shared with them what we were proposing, so they were aware of the criteria, the test methods we were going to introduce. Now that we have published the innovation standard, they will be submitting their products for formal assessment. We will have that data and we will be able to confirm whether the products meet the criteria that we've outlined or not. But I'm hoping that is the case. I'm reasonably confident that will be the case, but I cannot say with absolute certainty that is the case today. Maybe in a month's time I can be more positive on that outcome.
Great, thank you, Alistair. We then have a question from Danny from within the FIH office, who asks, how will the wet turfs which have recently been laid be recycled? And I think just to clarify, as I mentioned, Danny, that we're not asking for and we're not expecting and we don't want that turfs that have recently been laid, that are wet turfs, to be taken up and put down as new dry turfs. It'll be a case of replacing turfs at the end of their life cycle. So after that 8, 10, 12-year period that Alistair talked about. And therefore, the way that those turfs will be recycled or repurposed is the same as it currently is today. Alistair, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, I think it's just worth noting that the end-of-life disposal of all synthetic turf surfaces, doesn't matter if it's hockey, football, tennis, is becoming a more publicly aware topic. Certainly in Europe, there is increasing investment in recycling technology. You can now roll your fields up and ship them to various factories around the continent for recycling. That's starting to happen in Australia and the US. But recycling is a big challenge for the whole synthetic turf industry, which they're all working on actively to make their products simpler to recycle.
Thanks, Alistair, and thanks, Danny. A question from Morn Dodgen. So, Andre, could you allow Morn to unmute herself, or himself or herself? Thank you.
Morn, you can now turn on your microphone and your camera.
Thank you. Just a quick question from the keeper's point of view. I have a lot of keepers when discussing the turf with them and the new style that you guys want to move towards. Is any surface we've tried on keepers' pads is already quite hefty. Is that a factor you're still factoring in when you're talking about players and how the turf plays on their pads with the diving and sliding and all of that?
Yeah, Morn, thanks for the question. It's a really good one. Yeah, as I mentioned before, this solution to move from a watered to a non-watered dry field is not just about the turf. And for field players, what footwear they wear, for everybody, the balls that we're going to use, and other equipment, and particularly, and it's a discussion I'm having with some of the goalkeeper equipment manufacturers, is exactly that. How can we ensure that keepers are still able to slide and to dive in the way that they currently do on pitches? I think until we start to get some goalkeepers and some testing done and some goalkeepers playing on these new surfaces, we'll work out the size of this issue, and the goalkeeper manufacturers will certainly start to try different things. But you know, I mean, you sound like you're very familiar with the goalkeepers, and I mean down at the Indoor World Cup in South Africa earlier this year, there were a number of goalkeepers who have varying ways of improving their sliding in an indoor facility, as you know, whether that's putting on those sort of additional material socks on the outside of the pads, or spraying their pads with certain different lubricants, there are definitely going to be different ways that people will come up with. So it's not something we have a solution for, but it's something we've certainly identified the issue of.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Maud. Now, moving on to the next question, which comes from, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but Labo del Sol.
Okay, I'm going to turn them into a presenter.
Thank you. I think it might be someone called Anthony.
It is.
Anthony, you can put your microphone and your camera on. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
good.
The account is incorrect, Labo de Sol, but that's no. I wanted to ask Alastair about like Vikram was saying about the development of green technology. Is that gonna go together with the non-weight surface, or is that two things that are separate? I mean, we're probably gonna go to sugarcane or some other source for material in the future. How that would impact the fact that those surfaces can be played non-weight, or is that only the polyethylene one?
Hi, Anthony.
Yep.
The use of bio-based polyethylenes, ultimately, it's still a polyethylene yarn. But it's been sourced from a waste product from the sugarcane industry as opposed from fossil fuels, which is certainly more sustainable. But they're producing polyethylene, and what we are seeing in these new surfaces is modifications to the master batches used to make the polyethylene. So I don't see any reason why the green technology that has been used by various companies to produce polyethylene yarns can't then be used to make these new surfaces.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, we're certainly very keen and we're very encouraging of all turf manufacturers developing new green innovative solutions. This move to dry turf is just one element, if you like, of an improved environmental products. So we're certainly looking at encouraging all innovation, whether dry is something we're imposing, but other green technologies we're very keen to see evolve. Thanks, Anthony. Next question is, well, the account name is Iskandar Rashdan Rusli. Again, apologies for my pronunciation.
I cannot find Iskandar in the participants list, so I suggest you read his question.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Will do. So all turf manufacturers are preparing their version of dry turfs. There are some who seem to be in the dark about this, suggesting sending me a sand dress pitch. I guess, and here we are. Iskandar, good to see you. Did you want to add anything to your written question? If you unmute yourself.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah, right. So, okay. I'm just, okay. So I reread again. So if we're talking about, you know, all the manufacturers, they all they are all prepared their version of the dry turf. So the thing is, because like my text they say, because I've been in talk with 2 providers to install for some sort of training page for my school. They seems to be pretty much in the dark about this. And then they were talking about suggesting sand dress as an alternative. So that's why I was a bit worried. So I mean, you know, if this we are talking about investment, then you're talking about by Q3 2023, some of them will be available. So you know, if we were to end up with having a water pitch, and then by let's say in the short period, then suddenly have the dry turf technology. So this is why we are talking about worrying about the investment now. And of course, I'm worried about these 2 manufacturers, which just simply keep you know, in the dark. But when I ask questions, so you get my concern? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're in the unfortunate position of being right in the sweet spot. It sounds as if you are about to want to replace your turf.
Yeah.
And we're exactly at that moment where we know what the future is going to be. We know what the past is going to be, but we're not quite ready. And the turf manufacturers are not quite ready yet to make their turfs available at a mass-produced basis, proven that they're really successful and that they work really well. So if it's a case of looking to lay a turf next year in 2024, then by then we're confident we're going to have a number of options of turfs from different turf manufacturers. If it's something that needs to be done now, then I think either you look at a sand dressed option or you look at a water-based option if you already have an irrigation system in, and absolutely that can be used for the period of life of that turf for the next 8 to 10 years. You know, there's not going to be any insistence that at all levels of hockey that you suddenly can't play on wet turf, not at all. So if it's really something that has to happen now, and you really want to need to have a very, very high performing turf, then wet turf is the only option. But very soon there will be dry turfs available. Alistair, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I was just going to say, we have about 30 turf manufacturers around the world who work with the FIH as members of the quality program. You can split those into two groups. There are companies who manufacture the yarns and then make the carpets, and there are companies who buy the yarns from a supplier and then make the carpets. A lot of the innovation that we're talking about is actually in the yarn technology. So if you don't make the yarn, you're reliant on your supplier doing this R&D. So it may be that you're talking to a company who is in that second category.
Right.
But we are definitely seeing, I would say at the moment, probably there's 4, 5, 6 companies out of that 30 that we are aware of that are actively working on this topic. There may be other companies doing stuff, they just haven't shared it with the FIH yet. But as I say, there's a relatively small number, but they are the major manufacturers who are working on this. So they're the companies who are bringing product to market now, who are installing fields primarily in Europe at the moment. Many of them are European manufacturers, but I'm sure they will be looking to roll these out across the world as soon as they have confidence that the products are okay.
Yeah, okay, because if I were to put sandress, because sandress is pretty much alien in my country, Malaysia, it's pretty much, and because we know we are blessed with water here and there, and because I think even if I were to introduce something radical, sandress is quite radical in Malaysia, so that's why I'm just trying to avoid water-based at all costs.
Yeah, and I think you have the advantage in Malaysia. I'm in the UK, so we have the same advantage, if that's the right word, that we are in wet climates. So even when we put in a dry surface, it's going to be wet quite a lot of the time. So the risk of having a slightly inferior performance compared to a wet field is going to be reduced because most of the time it won't be wet, it won't be dry.
Yeah, but of course I would like to avoid water-based. I'm trying to target. If the timing is right, if the budget is right, the sponsor is right. So I mean, I can get the dry pitch for my school. That's my target.
Great.
Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Really good. Thank you. Thanks very much. Next question is from Gordon. Gordon, is it Mifsud? Thanks, Andre. Gordon, if you can try and unmute yourself and turn your camera on.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Gordon.
Hi, John. Alistair. Yes, we're actually in the same position as Iskander was, in the sense that we're in an in-between situation and need to take a decision. And in fact, the question I wrote there was to see whether there's a scheme or anything for prototypes to be installed, and whether it will also give you a cost saving by being a guinea pig. However, seeing the fact that I'm reading the timeline here, that we're talking about sort of end of next year as being a key moment, when it looks like if that timeline is respected, then more or less from 2025 will be able to buy the final top specified, but I think it's worth stretching it out for a few more months, because I don't think it's more than that, and getting the right thing at the right moment. Unless there are sort of fairly advanced prototypes, which, you know, and there's some scheme that FIH knows about that we might hear about and put it on perhaps secondary pitches for now.
Thanks, Gordon. I can certainly talk to the timeline, and then Alistair, you can maybe talk to the prototype question. But in terms of a timeline, Gordon, we absolutely will have turfs available for the second half of 2024. That's a must, because that's when the teams who are going to be playing and hoping to play in our World Cup in 2026 will need to start training on and preparing on dry fields. So yeah, 2024 is a hard deadline, if you like. So if your pitch can survive until then I think that's probably a better way to go. In terms of the prototypes and the testing, I mean, there are turfs going down at the moment, as we've mentioned a few times, and being tested. I'm sure if either you spoke to or we can put you in touch with some of the manufacturers, and you know, if they are interested in putting down a turf and using that in a sort of prototype way, then that's certainly an introduction that we can make.
Okay, thanks a lot. I might contact you after this.
Thanks, Gordon.
Sure.
Next question is from Edgar Agbo. Again, if you can unmute and put your camera on and ask your question, otherwise we can read it.
Edgar, you can turn your camera and your microphone.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? I'm here.
Yep.
Okay,
Great.
this is
Hi.
Edgar from Nigeria. Yeah, the question I have, you know, the current wet pitches, when they run out of water and they are dry and players slide on them, they create a lot of injuries. So how will these dry turfs now compare to those ones? Are there any safety guidelines that have been taken into consideration to protect players who slide? You know, this is similar to the question asked by Mon, but mine is from the player's angle. Mon was looking at goalkeepers. Is to protect players who slide on the turf. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Edgar. Thank you for the question. It's a really good one, and I think it highlights that point I was mentioning of those of us who are used to playing on wet turf, and then when it dries out, suddenly it becomes dry and sticky, and as you say, it can cause injury. So it's one of the measures that we now have that Alistair talked about, that player surface interaction is a really important element, and getting athlete feedback on exactly that is one of the key areas that we're looking for over the coming weeks and months, because absolutely we don't want to make it dangerous, of course, but again, as Alistair mentioned, it maybe we need to adapt some of the clothing and the kit that we wear. You know, there are players already who will wear undergarments, if you like, in order to help both their muscles or for religious reasons, but in some cases for performance reasons as well, to enable them to be able to dive without causing any skin abrasion. So yeah, it's certainly something we're very aware of, and it's one of the tests, but it's also something we're going to get athlete feedback on. Alistair, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I think that's fine, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Edgar. Okay. So I think we then have a similar question from Rajendra on a
Hi,
similar
John.
theme, but go for it. Hi.
Hi, so this is Rajendra from California here. We are starting a very new journey. So we are very brand new good kids on the town here who are trying to get the community-based turf here in San Francisco Bay Area. So my questions are two. How long we have to really wait to get this new tri turf, which is a mature and kind of a ready to use for the top level tournament, correct? Because we certainly can't invest money into the kind of ongoing kind of experiment and then wait for the new one, correct? And the second question is, from the maintenance wise and everything, are there will be any guidelines about how to use and make this kind of a community-based turf very successful project, something that we are really looking forward to it?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thanks, Rajendra. And yeah, great to hear from you in the next but one Olympic country.
It is happening in our backyard, yes.
Absolutely, which is great, and I'm sure you're very aware of the importance of water and droughts and you know, understanding of the issue that we're addressing here. So in terms of as mentioned in the timeline, in terms of the timeline of when these turfs available at the very top level that are going to be able to be used at the very top level, then that will be this time next year, pretty much. So that those turfs are then available for the second half of 2024. That's when we'll be defining what the exact turf will be for 2026. But I think that's only really relevant if we're looking at hosting, you know, World Cups, Olympic Games, Pro League, you know, the very top level. I think if we're looking at more of a community usage, then I mean, and Alistair can talk to this, but I don't think we need to be waiting until we've got that very top level turf fully designed and specified. So, Alistair, I don't know if you've got any other words of wisdom around community usage.
I think two things. One, I am sure the surfaces that we will be using in LA in 2028 will be different to the surfaces we use in 2026 at the World Cups. You know, the industry will be innovating and trying to improve the playing qualities. You know, and as I said before, if you look at the surfaces that we used in London, which was significantly better than the surfaces we used in Sydney, London compared to Tokyo is a major difference, and I'm sure we'll see that evolution moving forward. I think at below the elite level, these new surfaces will probably create more opportunities, and we may see the range of surfaces actually offered in the hockey market reducing because we have quite a diverse range at the moment. If you effectively can have a dry surface at an acceptable market price, which means that even at the community level, you can be playing on a really high quality hockey surface, why would you not do that? So I think there will be some convergence in the market that some of the sand field surfaces that we currently see may slowly disappear from the market because everybody will be able to have a dry surface without the cost of the irrigation and the water and all the environmental considerations.
So thank you, Oliver, and thank you, John. So one follow-up question: does it mean the future designs we should not consider the irrigation system at all as a part of the design, because that is something going away? So that kind of help us to make the cost as a kind of a certain one. In that way, we don't have to really consider the cost that is not supposed to be in the future. Then, right?
Absolutely. We're not saying if you have an irrigation system, stop using it or rip it out. But if you're building a new field and you're willing to use this new technology, or when this new technology has been proven and accepted, you won't need an irrigation system. Exactly. So it will reduce the cost of a new field significantly.
Thank you, Alistair and John. We'll come back with more questions later. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So scrolling down, Hazel, and there seems to be an issue with your technology or your camera, Hazel. So I'll read out your question. Does this mean that FIH will no longer be considering sand-based pitches as a solution for some countries? Absolutely not. No. So we're definitely not saying that, Hazel. And I think, as you know, it's a really important message that hockey can be played on any surface. It can be played currently on water-based surfaces. It will in the future be able to be played on dry, unfilled surfaces. It will be played on sand-based and sand-dressed surfaces, and in many parts of the world, it will continue to be played on natural grass. So, no, we're certainly not saying that we shouldn't be playing on sand-based. This is about an evolution at the very top end of our game, where until now we've always said that we need to play our top tournaments on a wet surface. Now we're removing that, and everything you've heard today is about how we can work with our partners and with our suppliers and the manufacturers of turf to develop a surface that plays as good as the current wet surface but doesn't require watering. So no, we're definitely not saying that that sand-based is no longer. In terms of the cost difference, as Alistair has said, the major cost difference is no longer requiring an irrigation system. Other than that, the base what is required below the surface is very similar to what is currently required. It'll be just a case of now no longer needing an irrigation system. Hopefully that answers your question, Hazel. We've then got a comment from David James, who leads one of our testing labs, confirming that there are numerous manufacturers working hard on dry turf technology. As Alistair said, we're aware of some of them at the FIH, others potentially keeping their powder dry, but probably talking to the test labs to test their new products and their new innovations, which is completely understandable and normal. So great to hear that there are a number already working on this and are ready to be certified in accordance with the recently released innovation category. Chantal, good to see your question here. If you'd like to unblock your mic and your video, then please go ahead. You have some direct experience, which would be great for you to share.
Oh, I can't see myself, but maybe you see me. But
we can see your room, but not you.
Oh, okay. I don't know what's happening, but I'm there.
Okay, great. Hi.
Yeah, you can see my question. As you may know, we will lay down a few of the dry pitches this year in the Netherlands, and I also talked with Alistair about it. We want to monitor it on many things, but especially also the experience of the players. And we're looking now for a company in the Netherlands who has experience with this to do this on an independent way. But I can imagine if we global want to know things about the dry pitches which are being laid, maybe it's best if we compare the questions, or maybe have the same questions, or maybe the same company. I don't know if that's possible, but seems a good idea, I thought.
Yeah, Chantal, it's an excellent idea. It's an excellent question, and fortunately, that's exactly in line with our thinking. And Alistair can discuss, maybe explain a bit of the detail. But yeah, we're working with Loughborough University to develop exactly that, a simple questionnaire that can be used everywhere in the world, so that we can collect the same feedback from athletes wherever we are in the world, so that we can then have exactly what you described, that global view. But Alistair, I don't know if you want to touch on that in more detail.
Yes, thanks, John. Hi, Chantal. Exactly as John said, Loughborough are basically developing a tool that will be used two ways. One, remotely, i.e. we will send it to national associations so they can then share it with venues that have these new fields. But equally, and I know we've already spoken about the fields in the Netherlands, they will want to come and undertake player feedback surveys face-to-face as opposed to remotely, because I think there is a great benefit in ensuring we get the same feedback from around the world, so we can compare the opinions and experiences of players in Northern European climates versus players in warmer Southern Hemisphere climates. We spoke to somebody in Malaysia earlier, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to introduce you to the guys at Loughborough. We've commissioned them to develop this tool. We're paying them to do this research as part of the project, and having the buy-in from the KNHB would be wonderful. And yeah, you're definitely on my agenda to come and visit.
Okay, I will come in contact with you afterwards then. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chantal, and fully agree and support that. And that tool that we've developed with Loughborough University will be available and will be sent out and will be for use free of charge for all NASA associations. Obviously, it's one of our responsibilities as the global and the international federation. I'm conscious of time. I think we've got 5 minutes left, so you'll forgive me, but I'm going to skip through some of these questions and just read them out and try and give some quick answers. And if there are questions that we don't get to, then we will reply to them after the chat. But I want to keep to time and respect all of your time. So the first question here is, well, the first comment here is from Juan Vechelana, I think it is. Equally wishing to be put in touch with some suppliers who are looking to prototype and to test their turf. So yeah, we'll certainly can help with that. If you contact Alistair and myself afterwards, then we can make some connections. Then there's another question from Anthony about existing surface meant to be used with reduced water, for example, could be used without water efficiently, or fields will have to be resurfaced with a new surface in any case. So certainly, and as Alistair has mentioned, the turfs that we've been using over the last 2-3 Olympic Games, they've used less and less water, which has been a really good move towards what we're now achieving in the dry turf, and certainly would be encouraging all turfs around the world to use as little water as possible in order to maintain performance. But yeah, at the end of life, that will be the time to then switch to the new dry turf, not to change it halfway through. A question then from Ahmed Asmer at African Hockey, and good to see you on the call, Ahmed. If the new dry turf is laid in a rainy country, will that require a water drainage system instead of a full irrigation system? Absolutely, and that's the case wherever they're laid. We would certainly encourage, and they need to have a drainage system. Usually, and there's lots of detail on our facilities documents on our website, but usually there is some kind of gradient. There's two options. There's either a porous base layer, porous asphalt base layer, so the water can drain vertically, or there is a slight gradient from the center of the pitches, and there are various different profiles that are used. But yes, absolutely, there needs to be a way for the water to drain away from the field, for sure. Next question, and I might try and make this the last one, from BP Rajan Shivanesh in India. Our suggestion is FIH builder inquired with our manufacturers, but they've not produced this dry turf yet. Absolutely. We're trying to boost this product, either of government countries. Client will not give project to us, or client will stop their projects until they get more competitive for good bargaining. Yeah, absolutely. So today, this is very much about sharing information and about bringing everybody around the world up to speed on where we are with this project. As we've mentioned a few times, a number of the turf manufacturers are now innovating and producing these new dry turfs. Over the course of the next few months, we certainly expect to see more and more come onto the market. So yeah, this is about promoting those products, making sure everyone is aware of them. And I'm confident that they will become available in all markets around the world very soon. Great. Okay, I think those are all of the major questions. So I think it's 2 minutes to 2 by here in Europe by my clock. So thank you very much, all of you, for attending today. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been interesting. We've recorded this webinar, and it will be available to all. We'll put it up onto our website. As Alistair said, there is a huge amount of information and many documents on our website in the quality program section. There's a new dry turf section, so please go there. If you have further questions, please contact Alistair or myself. But Alistair, unless there's anything further from you to add?
No, that's everything. Thanks, John.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for your work in the last 18 to 24 months on this, but also in putting today together. Thank you to Andre, who's been working behind the scenes to make sure that the technology worked. And thank you to our president, Tayyab Ikram, and to our CEO, Thierry Weil. I believe they've had to step onto different calls because they've got very busy schedules today, but thank you to them. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon, and to seeing these various dry turfs being rolled out around the world. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Andre. I think we can stop recording now.